For every saint born, there is always someone in their life who tempts them to reject the cross and aim only for the worldly aspirations around them. God allows this so that a saint can truly leave all and follow him. For St. Catherine of Siena, her persecutor was her mother. For St. Rose of Lima, her persecutor was also her mother. But for St. Aloysius, his persecutor was his father. Aloysius Gonzaga was born March 9, 1568, in an aristocrat wealthy family. He was the eldest of 8 children, and his home was a castle in Castiglione. His first words were the names of Jesus and Mary. Being the oldest, he was the first in line to inherit his father's title and status of Marquis. But even as a young toddler, Aloysius was very precocious. As he grew older, he was supposed to be interested in sports and worldly affairs, like the other noble children they knew. But Aloysius was different. He was quiet and thoughtful, and seemed to have no interest in sports, politics, or the world. While his father saw this as a weakness, his mother saw it as a sign of a special calling, and she would regularly pray over him. However, his father had other plans and was determined to mold his son into a soldier. He gave Aloysius little toys of guns to play with, and when he was only 5, he would take Aloysius to military camps, where he hoped his son would be influenced and inspired by the leadership roles around him. Instead, Aloysius withdrew even more from military life, not liking the loud sounds of the booms or the smell of gunpowder around him. He did, however, pick up on some military language around him, which his mother was not very happy about. But his father's plans never took root, although he never gave up. Aloysius by nature was too gentle and too humble for military life. He never argued with his parents or showed any sort of rebellion. He was friendly and affectionate with the staff and did his chores diligently. He had no concerns or interest in worldly affairs. In fact, he was more interested in the household staff's life, being attracted to their humble work of serving others. Aloysius' father took advantage of this and sent him and his younger brother Rodolfo to Florence to work as a page. While there, Aloysius understood with a maturity beyond his years how a quest for power could corrupt even the most brilliant minds. This, along with an illness with his kidneys, which troubled him throughout his life, gave him time to read about the saints. This inspired him to lead an active prayer life, and he soon developed a prayer routine through the Psalms, the Office of Mary, and other devotions. When he came back to Castiglione, Aloysius was changed, but not in the way that his father had wanted. At the age of 10, Aloysius received his first Holy Communion and began to practice acts of self-denial, such as passing up luxurious meals and eating something simpler and plainer instead. Once he gave his nice clothing to a servant, saying that there was no need for him to have such extravagance. At 11 years old, he was teaching catechism to the poor children and fasting 3 times a week. When he was 12 years old, his family moved to Madrid, where Aloysius and his brother became pages. During this time of pre-adolescence, Aloysius began to struggle with temptations against purity and sought out help from his spiritual director. He would also keep his eyes lowered at all times as a way to avoid temptation. However, his strategy to avoid girls didn't always work, because sometimes the girls, who were drawn by his good looks and nobility, would come to him. This happened most often at dances and banquets. One day at a dance, seeing his son's bored and disinterested expression, his father bent down and said, "This is your future, Aloysius, a life of power and authority. You should be proud." But this only prompted Aloysius to seek a quiet corner in his chambers later that night and pray earnestly to God. "Teach me to desire only you." It was during his stay in Spain, surrounded by beauty, prestige, and power, that Aloysius made a decision. He would devote his entire life to God and give up all his claims to his family's money and rank. This was not a spontaneous decision, as he knew what this would do to his family, especially his father. But as much as he loved his father, he loved God more. Although Aloysius didn't yet know how he was going to serve God, he knew he was called to chastity. When he broke the news to his parents that he would never marry, his father was furious. he saw Aloysius's refusal as not only a stupid decision, but ungrateful, and a rejection of the Gonzaga lineage. "My father," Aloysius explained, "I am the servant of the King of Kings. My devotion to him deepens rather than diminishes my love for you." But this didn't do much to satisfy his father, and the tension between father and son went on for 4 years. This time of suffering was not for nothing. Although Aloysius suffered much from his father's anger, he became closer to God because of it. His prayer life deepened, and even his vow of chastity inspired others. During this time of discernment, Aloysius felt he was called to join the Jesuits. He was drawn to their life of serving others, but when his family learned of his decision and that he planned to give up his inheritance, this was like salt in the wound. "Do you not see that God has placed you in this family and status for a reason?" his father pleaded with him. "Your wealth and power are tools for his mission. Why throw them away?" His father even wrote to the Pope, hoping that the Church would intervene from Aloysius joining the Jesuits, but this only backfired on him when Aloysius gave the Pope his reasons for wanting to join, and the Pope refused to interfere. The day finally came when Aloysius signed the papers to give up his fortune to his younger brother Rodolfo. This was done in front of his family, advisors, and court officials. His father was still not happy with Aloysius' decision, but he had to admit that Aloysius put up a good fight and never gave in, which showed tenacity and commitment. Aloysius joined the Society of Jesus on November 25, 1585, trading his fine clothes for a plain black cassock of a Jesuit religious. Finally, he was where he belonged and where his heart had always wanted to be. The other novices around him admired his bravery for giving up his royal life and riches for a mortified life, and they were inspired to imitate his enthusiasm. Rather than be waited on and served, now Aloysius served others. Sometimes this meant maintaining the garden or doing kitchen duties, all of which he did gladly. As a Jesuit novice, life was a balance between work, prayer, and study, and like everything else, Aloysius threw himself into his studies to learn more about God. The only thing he struggled with was his health, which hampered his fasting and mental capacity for studying. He frequently suffered from repeated fevers, stomach problems, and other things that required him to be in bed at times. Because of his poor health, he was told to eat and rest more than his other brothers, which he didn't like. But in obedience, he found humility, and eventually, by humility, he learned submission. As Aloysius had always desired, he was able to serve the people in Rome with his Jesuit mission. But although his heart was fervent, his human instincts rebelled at the sights of poverty and the smells that came with it. Together, with the help of his spiritual director, St. Robert Bellarmine, he fought against his human instincts to flee, and instead embraced his duties with open arms. He spent most of his time listening to the poor in their hardships, giving them words of hope and comfort. He gave them food and clothing as he was able. He visited the prisoners and the sick in the hospitals. One man who was a patient in the hospital, whom everyone was avoiding because of his leprosy, was astounded when Aloysius took him by the hand and prayed with him. The man broke down crying. "No one has touched me in years," he said. Aloysius's health was still an issue, as the work among the poor was taxing, with long hours and walking through all sorts of weather. But Aloysius refused to slow down. He only said, "If I must wear myself out for the sake of souls, then let it be so." In 1591, a plague broke out among Rome, killing thousands of people. Most people fled the city, but Aloysius knew his duty was there to help the sick and the dying. He labored among the other Jesuits, washing wounds, feeding the hungry, and praying with the dying. In addition to this, Aloysius began to work with children who had become orphaned because their parents had died from the plague. He frequently checked in on them, sometimes taking them into his own personal care if no one else was available. He fed them, clothed them, and taught them their prayers and catechism. Because the hospital was always on overflow with patients, the Jesuits decided to open their own hospital, where volunteers took care of the victims of the plague. Aloysius was one of these people, although his superiors didn't want this, due to his youth and poor health. But Aloysius respectfully pressed to let him stay, feeling strongly that this was where God wanted him to be. Through all of this, Aloysius still kept up his rigorous prayer life, often praying in the night, despite a feeling of coldness and dryness in his prayers. Often he was tempted with thoughts of his old life and doubts about his new life. Temptations of wondering where God was, why he didn't answer Aloysius in the same way he used to, why he was so distant, and the biggest question of all, was all of this worth it? In his humility, Aloysius realized that he had no control over his life or how God chose to sanctify him. And with this knowledge, the only thing he could do was hold tighter to God. Working among the sick and dying finally caught up with Aloysius, and he too fell victim to the plague. He had already known he would die young, and some biographers say that he was told by the Saint Angel Gabriel that he would die on the octave of the feast of the Corpus Christi. And Aloysius did die on that day, just a few days before his 23rd birthday, invoking the holy name of Jesus and Mary with a crucifix in his hands. In 1600, St. Mary Magdalene de Pazzi, who was a mystic, said she had a vision of Aloysius in heaven, radiant in glory because of his interior works. St. Aloysius is the patron saint of the youth, students, and those with incurable diseases.